I am so happy to have Dr. Helene Marshall and Dr. Andrea De Capua back on the podcast. This time, they're talking about the same topic as before, SLIFE, but they're talking about their second edition. Their second edition of the much loved classic. This time, it's going to be called Breaking New Ground. Dr. De Capua, Dr. Marshall, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
exciting to be here again.
Well, you are the two most foremost expert on the topic of SLIFE. So let's talk about this. Can you share a story about working with SLIFE that has influenced your practice?
Well, I'll take that one. Actually, I have three quick stories, and later I'll tell you why I needed to talk about each of these three situations. The first one was a student who was not doing well. He wasn't participating. He wasn't part of the class. And one day he came up and asked to see me during my office time. And so he did. We had an appointment, and it lasted quite a while. And he asked me a lot of questions. I talked to him, and I kept waiting for him to ask me about the assignments or the tests or something, and he didn't. Then he goes back to class, and the next day he was a completely different student. And it was obvious. He was involved, he was working and part of the group. So I asked him afterwards, I said, could you come up and see me a second? And I said, you seemed completely different and really happy in class today. He says, now I know you. I can learn from you.
Yeah.
So what he needed to do was know me as a person, who I am, how I spend my time, who I see when I'm not in school, my family, right?
Mhm.
So put a pin in that. This really was interesting for me to see that, okay?
Where is he from, by the way?
Actually, if you want to know, his name was the same as yours. His name was Tan, and he was Vietnamese.
Oh, wow. Okay. I can see that where he said that.
That's interesting. Okay. And the second student, who, by the way, was Hmong, and his name was Kua, he was in a class where I was doing all listening, speaking, reading, writing. It was kind of all-purpose intermediate class. And I gave them halfway through a questionnaire. I wanted to know how the class was going. And they all submitted their questionnaires, and I went through them. And most of them said things like, oh, I'm learning so many new words, or I like the way you present grammar, or, it's great when we watch a video or something like that. What did Kua say? He said, what I like best is that we all work together to help each other learn.
Yes.
So he didn't focus on the language pieces. He focused on the process that we were working together. And that was fascinating to me, that was the most important thing. That's what he enjoyed the most. Put a pin in that one. And the last story, very different. This was a vocational program. And these students were preparing to be nurses' aides. And they couldn't become nurses' aides without passing a major standardized test. And they couldn't pass it. And I had to help them with, their English. I'm working with them on their English. But that wasn't the issue. What happened was they would get these multiple choice questions about situations and, what is the correct approach? What is the correct answer? And they would go by their own experience, not by the book that they were supposed to be studying in their class, not my class, but the nurse's aide class. And in vain, I told them, just study the book, put what it says in the book. And they would say, no, 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 no. I know, because I've experienced this in my life, and I know that's the right answer, not that, And that really bowled me over, because I realized if they hadn't personally experienced something, they would either randomly answer, or they would skip the question,
Right.
or if they saw what they believed to be the right answer, they would choose it. and get it wrong. So those are my 3 stories.
Who was that last student? Where were they from?
They were mostly Haitian.
Okay. So I'm interested when you say put a pin in all those 3, I'm sure you're going to be bringing those back in our conversations later. So let's go to Dr. DeCapua. What is different about the second edition here and from your classic?
Well, the second edition, first of all, it's completely updated, but that's only part 1. Because we now have 2 parts, and that's particularly exciting because in our book, part 1 is more of the theory. We present MALP, we go into a lot of detail, we have lots of examples, and we talk about really exciting things students can do with their teachers. But part 2, the new part, is really new. It's all projects, and it's divided into young learners, adolescents, and adults. And in each one, we have complete samples of projects, step by step. Now, the idea with these projects is the teachers can look at them, they can adapt them. So even if a project is geared towards the younger learner, the idea is it's going to spark you. And you can use this with your adolescents, you can use it even with the adults. But the beauty of it is it gives you step 1, step 2, step 3, and so on. And we talk about at the end of each project, there's a little bit of the teacher reflects on it, how she felt about it, what it did with her students. And just like the first edition, and at the end of every chapter, we had for further exploration. So students it could be used as a training book with teachers in training or for professional development, also for book clubs. We found there were a lot of book clubs that use this, professional, not, for fun ones. And we have the same thing in part 2, so that you get the idea, you're looking at these detailed projects, and then we build on that also. And this is extremely valuable. So you have the classic updated part 1, and then this brand new part 2, which is very much hands-on in the field, actual projects done by actual teachers, not made up or anything.
So it looks like part 1 is the principles of MALP, and part 2 is the applications of those principles. Dr. Marshall, you want to say something?
Yes, I just want to add one thing, that in the time since we published this book, the world has changed. Technology is here to stay. And so for each project, we have a section, technology integration, and we give suggestions for how to use technology if you choose to do that. Yeah. What are some options?
Perfect.
And we also have an entire tech project, which we won't take the time now to describe, but just to say it's a podcasting project. Yeah. And the reason that's so powerful is that it leverages the oral skills of SLIFE.
Yes.
And they become very engaged and enjoy it. And of course, we scaffold the written word alongside of the oral. But that's a really fun project when you take a look at the book. Yeah.
That sounds fun. Podcasting is right up my alley.
Yes.
Please tell us about the cultures that students are coming from and how that's different than the cultures where the teachers are coming from, typically.
That's a very interesting question. And it's actually, I'm going to use this expression, food for thought, because the immediate reaction is, what are the cultures of the students? And what are the cultures of the teachers? And that's something a lot of people want to focus on. And it's important, there's no question about it. But our work looks at something a little different than the traditional idea of culture. Oh, you come from country X, your culture is country such and such, or you come from country Y, so your culture is this. We're looking at culture a little bit differently, namely, what were your prior educational experiences? And we look at it in terms of Western style formal education, or just formal education, which is found globally, disseminated around the world, but it's a certain type of education premised on, you've got formal curricula, you've got textbooks, literacy is primary, you've got knowledge is kind of divided up into subject areas or content areas. And it's a very specific type of teaching. You find it everywhere. You can walk into a classroom and anywhere in the world, and if you're in a formal Western style classroom, if you want to say it that way. That's a one culture. That is the culture of formal education. But SLIFE, it doesn't matter what country they're coming from. The idea that they're SLIFE is that they have not had opportunity for age-appropriate formal education. For whatever reason, whether it's been economic or there are large interruptions, strife, whatever. So they have not developed this cultural identity as a learner in the situation of formal education. And that's really important to our work, because we're looking at the similarities that all these people from these diverse cultures share. And that's the formal education piece. And we don't always recognize that, because we ourselves, not only are we the products of formal education and this culture, we're the purveyors of it. And it's very difficult to step outside and see, oh, there's a different culture here. It's a little bit easier when, oh, their food is like that, and my food is like this, right? Or they do this and we don't do that. But when it's something that is so deep, then it's harder. And that's really the underlying base for our work.
So we're not talking about cultures and flags. We're talking about the culture of formal education and the culture of informal education. So
Yes.
would you give some characteristics of both of those?
Well, I mentioned briefly some characteristics of formal education. It's prescribed curricula, it's set curricula, it's based on literacy. We divide knowledge up into subject areas, whether it's science or English or whatever it is, could be whatever language, history. We have trained teachers, we have certain expectations, it's kind of lockstep knowledge. There's a lot of abstract thinking, it's future focused. We can go on, but I think we kind of know what it is, but the difference is the other culture, this other paradigm of learning where SLIFE come from, namely informal ways of learning. Most, if not all, depending where they are on this kind of a continuum of ways of learning that we talk about, has been out in the real world. Their learning is pragmatic. They learn what is necessary at the moment. They learn what is important for their family, for their community, for themselves. Any kind of learning tasks are concrete. They see the results immediately or within a very immediate time frame. And learning is very much kind of a mentor-mentee relationships. I observe, I imitate, I get feedback primarily nonverbal many times, but just by demonstration again. So I do it again, and I continue the cycle until I've mastered what it is I'm trying to learn, and then I can become a mentor. And there's no literacy involved. It's not important. There are no books involved. You're not sending them off to cooking school or to whatever. They're learning it alongside of another person. And another important thing, we look at age age is so important in our formal educational system. We do have alternative pathways, we do this, that when they get older, but age is really important. In informal ways of learning, when the culture, the community, the family deems that you're ready to do it, or even you yourself, that's when you do it. So we often see SLIFE come to our classrooms, and they may be 11 years old, they may be 17 years old, and they have adult responsibilities from our point of view and can do so many things that are outside of the school, but there's rich funds of knowledge that they've gained. So it's a very different type of learning, very rich type of learning. It's not school knowledge for the most part.
So I'm thinking of one where let's say that in an agricultural society, students are learning how to plant rice at a very particular season, and they're not learning it for a test. They're learning how to grow rice for that moment, for that season.
Mm-hmm.
And they're learning alongside an elder who's been doing it for years, and they're doing it next to their brothers, their cousins, and they're different ages, but they're doing the same task. It's not knowledge for the future exam. It's knowledge for right now.
Exactly, exactly. And to take another example, when we talk about MALP, and I'm just going to insert that now because it just fits so perfectly, is that there've been a number of programs that have implemented MALP, but they've implemented gardens and farming. But they're using MALP and they're implementing because they're providing this runway into academic ways of thinking and academic tasks, because you're not just planting the rice, you're keeping a log of, which field is doing better, for example, or which plant in this case, they're not doing rice fields. Which plant is doing, where is it getting more sun than the plant over in the corner? How much fertilizer did this plant get? How much did the other one get? What type of soil? And all these, so they're learning something very concrete, often including elders coming and volunteering and helping out, but they're putting it into a academic perspective, learning science.
So I hear like data gathering, hypothesis making, statistics, analyzing. And so we're adding that, something they're familiar with.
Yes.
The structural way the learning is familiar, but they're adding the academic components as well.
Well, and they're developing this academic way of thinking. They're engaging in what we call decontextualized tasks, keeping a log, or comparing and contrasting, with a Venn diagram or, some kind of chart, which is a decontextualized task, but they're using real pragmatic information, or whatever we want to call it. So that's MALP, right? I mean, we can go on and on and on with MALP, but we haven't really introduced MALP yet. But
well, then let's go to Helene, both of you, to do that. So let's talk about what is MALP, and then what are the principles of MALP, including talking about what it's not, what it is, common myths about what people think it is, and then let's bust them here, or let's shed the light on them here.
So, so I'd like to start with a metaphor. We like to talk about creating fertile spaces, and one of the I am not a plant person. I'm not a green thumb, whatever's the opposite of a green thumb. But Pamela Broussard, who is a green thumb, if you've heard of her, has a wonderful metaphor. And she says that when you see wildflowers and they're so beautiful and you want to take them home and you want them to grow in your garden, that when she first tried to do that, it didn't work. And they would just die within a day or two. And she realized when you do that, you have to take some of the original soil that they were living in when you saw them before. So the metaphor, of course, is that in MALP, we use some of the original soil from SLIFE in order to create fertile spaces where they can grow and be happy in our system, okay? Because they are here. So if you can think in terms of that, we're really looking at apples and oranges. We're looking at two different paradigms. And what we've decided is you can't just say, oh, now we know their paradigm, which Andrea was explaining very clearly. I think you kind of get that now. Okay, their paradigm, if we teach that way, say, oh, well, that's the way they learn. Let's go for it. They're not going to succeed in our system, just like the nurses' aides I talked about, okay? And if we just say, okay, here's how to do formal education, and we scaffold and make it more and more accessible for them, much more than for other learners, we're still not acknowledging their paradigm, and we're just going to beat ourselves against the wall trying to get them to succeed in a paradigm that means nothing to them, okay? And so what we've done is we take pieces, and not randomly, obviously, we take pieces from their paradigm and our formal educational paradigm. That's why the name of MALP is mutually
adaptive learning
paradigm,
paradigm.
because it takes pieces of both. And teachers can't teach that way because, and we've done this for years now, they have something called paradigm blindness. So paradigm blindness is a concept that's being discussed in many fields, not as much in education, in science, in business, in economics, if you Google it, you'll see it everywhere. It's paradigm blindness. The idea for us in understanding that concept is that we only see our own paradigm, the formal educational paradigm. So what in the training that we do and in our books, we help educators to remove those blinders so they can see this other paradigm. Once they see it, then we can give them MALP and we can say, okay, you see the two paradigms? MALP, we're going to take this, we're going to take that, and then we give them the projects, and every project follows the framework. And so it's not a list of strategies. It's not, here are 5 things to do for SLIFE. Okay, it's more of a mutually adaptive paradigm that has these elements in it and falls into 3 basic categories. Okay, so what is it that we do? Okay, so the first piece of MALP is called conditions for learning. So if you think about learning, everybody has certain conditions. They can only learn if it's quiet, to pick something very basic. Okay. Well, you know from a lot of what Andrea was talking about and the examples I gave you in the beginning, SLIFE can only learn if they feel connected, if they feel there's a personal connection, not only with the other students, but with you as
learning community.
it has to be interconnectedness. That's really important. So in MALP, we accept that. And we don't talk as much about being independent and being on your own and not needing other people. We create a web, and all the projects do that. They're trying to become interdependent, not independent. So that's one condition. The second condition, and you mentioned this yourself, Tom, just a minute ago, it's going to be immediately relevant. Now, everything can't be immediately relevant, but even if you think about a word problem in math, instead of talking about, a semi going down the highway or something like that, use the content and the language that students can relate to that makes sense to them in their lives. You're still doing the same math problem. And so that's an example of a very simple way to make it more relevant for them. And stop talking about the future. They don't even hear it when you say, oh, college and career readiness. We're all supposed to talk about that. Not with SLIFE. Okay. So those are the conditions and we accept them. We really do. The second piece of MALP has to do with the processes. Now you remember Kua, who said we help each other learn. One of the key pieces for them is that they get a chance to share responsibility. Now, this can be problematic because there's always that cheating. So we always have low stakes, you can share ideas. High stakes, it's a test, you're on your own. So in MALP, what we do is we give them practice, low stakes, high stakes, back and forth, so they get used to share. Oh, now we're going to share. Now you're on your own. Now we're going to share. And we get them so that it's not a big deal when they're on their own, but we give them a lot of opportunities to share. And you'll see that in the projects too, that we'll talk about. The other process they're used to doing besides shared responsibility is probably the first thing you think of when you think of SLIFE, which is oral transmission. They've learned everything orally. That's how they pass down their stories, their traditions. That's how they know so much about their ancestors. It's not because they've been reading about them. It's because of the oral transmission. And oral transmission isn't just, those of us in language teaching go listening, speaking, reading, writing. It's not just listening and speaking. Oral transmission is more like, well, I use the example of Homer. My husband likes to study ancient Greek, so I have a lot of Homer in my house. And there are certain set phrases that are memorable, and the way that the language flows and spirals, it stays in your brain. It's a little bit like the Bible too, right? And the Lord said there was light, and light separated from the darkness, and it kind of spirals around. So that's what they're used to. They're used to learning in that way, and many of them can really remember a lot, hold it in their heads. That's their background. Okay. So what do? Well, we scaffold the written word with oral transmission. So we allow for the processes that they're used to, but we transition them to literacy. And again, you'll see it in the projects. All right. The third part of MALP, which is the trickiest and the one that educators have the hardest time learning, I'm going to hand that off
to me. This is truly the hardest part for educators, this third component. And remember the blinders that Helene mentioned, the paradigm blindness, and then you want to move the blinds. We can work with them pretty well. It's pretty easy to get to component 2. You get to component 3. It is extremely difficult for us to see, for educators to see what the hidden challenge is. And the hidden challenge is what we call decontextualized tasks and underlying academic or associated ways of thinking, academic ways of thinking. So for example, think of, you know, one of the, I'm going to go simple tasks that we often ask students to do. And if you one of the simple tasks might be, oh, we'll give you a little worksheet, and you have a picture over here, and you have a word over here, you know, the list of pictures, list of words. I'm not even going to go into what the kinds of pictures, we're good at that, but just say the task is to, what are you supposed to do? Correct picture, correct match. And sometimes they draw lines, sometimes they have to use the letter, whatever. Think about this, how difficult this is if you are new to literacy. The assumption is when we're working with kindergartners, we teach them how to do that, preschoolers. By the time you get to 3rd, 4th, 10th grade, what? You don't know how to do this? Of course. Oh, it must be the language. You don't understand the language. No, it's the task itself that's the problem, because it's an unfamiliar, decontextualized task. This doesn't happen around in the real world. You don't go around with the rice drawing lines, you know, from the rice field to your elder holding whatever it is he's holding, right? No. And there's so many examples of that. And this is considered a simple, basic task. But think of some of the other ones that we asked our students to do. You know, very low level. Oh, we're going to teach the present tense. Okay. So at 6 o'clock, I get up. At 7 o'clock, I eat breakfast. At 12 o'clock, you know, and on and on. Okay. And then we're going to have different people. And I'm not even going to get into the fact that they're using the textbook. All right. So these are people that are completely removed, that they have no relationship to. You can picture in your own mind the picture of the textbook or the worksheet. Now, think about that. All right, I've controlled for language, right? And I've taught them what a clock looks like, maybe digital. But wait a minute. This chart is more than language and content, because if I've got 5 names and I've got times across and activities and I have to fill them in, I am also doing what kind of thinking that's required here. Classification. I have to classify my day. I have to divide up my day, and certain things happen at certain times. And we don't think of this as classification necessarily, because when we talk about classification, we're thinking about things such as fiction and nonfiction, or we're thinking of mammals versus fish or amphibians. But no, even this basic chart is classification. We don't realize that. Again, you know, the paradigm blindness. And this is a simple task. Right? What do you mean you can't do this? And then we can also go into the piece, you know, what do the pictures look like? And why do we have people nobody knows? Why can't we start with the familiar, start with the students, going back to what Helene was talking about, the relationship? We can start with the students in the class, and then we can build in these things. And then the chart itself can also become more relevant, immediately relevant, as we are working on these academic ways of thinking using a decontextualized task. And if you think about If you take it any textbook, it doesn't matter who it's written for, at any level, it is completely filled with decontextualized tasks and a lot of assumptions. Even when they say there's no literacy or minimal literacy, think about, do you have to circle A and B? Do you have to check or put a number? I mean, we can go on and on and on. I could spend hours. But my point is, what we need to do in MALP, because this is the hidden challenge, we need to teach our SLIFE how to do the task. We have to teach them how to engage in this academic way of thinking. And the way we scaffold it is we use familiar language and content. And here's an example, when we talk about familiar language and content, just looking again at what I do at certain times of the day, if they don't know the word and they're in English, let them use their own word. And then you could teach them the word, but at least they can produce something, or they can work together maybe to come up with the English. This is a clear area where translanguaging, the idea of using the entire repertoire of languages at your disposal, you can use them, leverage them in order, because what you're teaching in this point is not the language and not the content. You're teaching the decontextualized task and the academic way of thinking. And once they've mastered that, then you can do all the language and content and everything else. But you have to think of it, as three pieces: language, content, and academic, and then this targeting the academic ways of thinking, which we use decontextualized tasks for.
Right. Because imagine, Helene, please go.
I just wanted to make a point that I think whoever's watching this might be saying, but I have to teach English, I have to teach the curriculum, how am I going to do that? Try and think of MALP as a runway. The plane will take off, but they need this runway first. So you front load their instruction with MALP.
Yeah.
Once they get it and they're comfortable with the academic ways of thinking and the decontextualized tasks, and they'll have better access to the curriculum, they'll be able to benefit from your instruction, they will be able to handle the assessments. But without the runway, you're wasting your time. So it's better to spend the time up front.
Yeah.
Just wanted to add that.
I just want to expand on that, because I think this is such an important component that, again, it's so hard for teachers to see. But to build on Helene's point is that, well, wait a minute, how can I do this? Well, once you've taught and they have become comfortable, for example, with certain kinds of tasks, decontextualized tasks and academic ways of thinking, you don't have to teach them again, because they're constantly practicing them in new contexts. And I want to go back to the idea, what do we do in kindergarten, first grade, or pre-K? We are teaching, the teachers are teaching these, and then they don't have to repeat them. What they're doing is they're doing it at a higher level, right? They're not teaching how to compare and contrast in fifth grade anymore, because they know how to do it and so on. But we have to front load, as Helene said, because it's not remedial. Because if you haven't learned it, you're not relearning something you should have learned the first time, but you are learning for the first time. And that's why it's so important to understand these hidden challenges and how these can be the obstacle. And for teachers to keep asking themselves, are the students having difficulties? Is it the language? Is it the content? Or maybe it's the task and the kind of thinking. Maybe I need to take a step back and introduce those first.
Because what you're saying is, what I'm hearing is decontextualized tasks is, initially, they're unfamiliar with students because they've never seen how to make a bar graph.
Exactly.
What is a bar graph? How do I read it? We contextualize it, then it becomes familiar. We put it in something that they understand. Then we move to something that they don't understand, but still expecting them to do a bar graph.
Exactly. And a bar graph is a little bit more than the matching, but you get the idea. I mean, all of these,
Yes.
The chart, the bar graphs, you can go on and on, fill in the blank even.
Woo. Well, I'm happy that you both spent time helping us understand that paradigm shift. And like you said, Helene, it's like a ramp onto academic, not just like it's like not like a launching pad. So let's talk about sharing lessons that infuse principles of MALP.
So MALP is not lesson-based. We do have discussions of lessons and we talk about lessons, but really MALP is projects. And some people sometimes give us pushback. I don't have time for projects. I have to do this. I have to do that. What we want to emphasize in MALP is that project doesn't have to be this huge end of year science item. We can have small projects because the idea is we want to infuse everything we do with MALP. So a project may be a series of lessons, and it also may be a series of small projects. But what's important is that we're always integrating MALP into what we are doing. So I mean, we can talk about some lessons quickly, but I don't think it's valuable. But they're in the book. There's some of the great ones in the book. Chapter 4 has some in throughout. But I think what's more important for us to look at how MALP and projects fit together. And I'd like to kind of I'm going to turn it over to Helene. But what I want to people think about with projects is, are you familiar with Matryoshka dolls? You know, they're the Russian dolls, and they're nesting dolls. Exactly. Well, in MALP, think of it that way. You know, little dolls, more bigger, bigger, bigger. That's MALP, because instead of an isolated lesson, one-shot deal, let's do this workshop, sorry, not workshop, worksheet. No, get away from worksheets, got to get rid of those. Don't want to do that. Think of projects and think about how you want to be learner-centered. Think about how you want to encourage all the 4 skill areas that we always talk about as language teachers, and how we're going to infuse MALP. And we can do this through projects. And it also allows for so much individualization, right? Because our students are not at the same level. And many times, SLIFE, one SLIFE, if you're really lucky, you might have a SLIFE class. And if you're even luckier, maybe you'll have them divided by prior educational experiences, but probably not. So doing projects allows for that differentiation. So there's always something, even somebody brand new to school can do in a project.
So would you like to hear about some projects? Okay. So I think the most popular one is the one we'll start with. And it's interesting that we just talked about the kind of class you may have. And one of the things, two things actually about this project is that it kind of goes on all year. And one of the things that is a problem somewhat with all of multilingual learners, not just SLIFE, is they may not come in September.
Or whenever the beginning of the school year is.
They come when they come. Right. So this project allows for that, which is makes it so much more fun for the students to do it. And you'll see why in a minute. And the other thing I want to mention about this project, and again, why I think it's so popular, is that it can be done for elementary, secondary, or adult learners. And we actually have an article that gives that example in all 3 levels, okay? In the book, we talk about one specific teacher, because the way we handle projects in our book, as Andrea mentioned earlier, is that we have a specific teacher who really did the project in her real class, and so it's going to be a specific grade level. But all of the projects can be somewhat adapted. But we've already done that for you with this one, and it's called the Newcomer Booklet. Newcomer Booklet, yes. Okay, so I'm going to give you the quick version because read the book. So the Newcomer Booklet was initiated by Renee Finneran, who is now a MALP trainer. And what she did was she got permission. This is innovative, so you can't just necessarily do it. You might have to get an administrator to back you up and get buy-in, okay? Unless we've come to your district to train. I'll tell you about that later. So Renee had to do a nonfiction unit. She had to teach the students what's a nonfiction book. What are the parts of a nonfiction book, right? Mm-hmm. Table of contents, She even had them do a glossary at the end. I mean, she taught them nonfiction. But what was it? It was how to be a super second grader. So what it was each student chose one routine that they do, like come to the rug, sharpen your pencil, write in your homework planner. Each student had one page, and on the page they had pictures. They drew pictures, and then they had a sentence, and she taught them the sequence words because each one was a procedure, right? So she's teaching them sequential activities. So first, then, next, finally. Yeah, okay. So you see how they're learning. It's decontextualized because it's a page in a book. It's not going to the rug. Going to the rug, they know how to go to the rug, but now they're going to have a page in a book that talks about going to the rug. Okay, so each student had a page, and each student made their own cover for the book. And all she said was, make a picture of our school. It's about our school. So each student had their own cover, and each student had a page. She took all the students, we're talking about a full class there, like 25 children, and she made a stack of all the books. So the inside of the books, that was the same, everybody's page, right? But they each had their own cover. And instead of her having to orient new students, whenever a new student came in, they would all, oh, my book, take my newcomer booklet, because their own cover was on it, right? So you can see the excitement and how it was immediately relevant. It had everything, interconnectedness, it's all there, from the oral to the written, right? And it was sharing responsibility because they made the book together, but each one was accountable. And of course, you see that it's academic thinking right there. And it's decontextualized because it's a book. They created a book about their real life. So that's one of my favorite examples, and it is a very popular one. And there's much more detail in the book. As Andrea said earlier, every project is spelled out with steps, specific steps, how to do this project. So
just listening to the first project example, I can see how helpful it is for kids coming who are SLIFists, because it's collectivist. It's kids working together, on their own individual parts, but for a whole society, for a whole community, for that classroom. And so it honors how they learn. They learn to contribute to a community. And so now they're doing that in a school context, and we're just adding in the academic aspects of that.
And they already knew the content of what they were doing and the language about it, because she says every morning, come to the rug. They come, that was familiar. So remember when Andrea said that we have to make the language and content familiar, but there's one way.
So one of the things I'm just going to talk in general about another project we have an entire chapter on for us is the quintessential MALP project. You know what it is? No. Okay. It's surveys. And surveys are something that people in our field love, and everyone's familiar with surveys. And I've been watching a lot of teachers and hearing they're doing all these online surveys now. We used to do the pencil and paper, raise the hand. I mean, people are still doing that. Doesn't matter what kind of survey you do, and you're familiar with, but we look at surveys differently than most people do. Most teachers look at it as a way to start off a topic, or the review of the day, or just a kind of a warm-up. For us, surveys are data collection, valuable, incredible data collection. So no matter what kind of survey you're going to do with your students, you collect the data, and then you want to do something with it. You generate it. And as I said, we have a whole chapter. This, you can't read this, is backwards, but so what you want to do is you get this information and you want to do something with it. So for example, we talk about briefly one teacher trying to build some interconnectedness in the classroom, getting some information about what they like to do in the free time. Okay, what do they, is it music? Is it whatever, watching Netflix, talking with their friends, playing video games? It doesn't matter. And you get that information, and then, you do something with it. And you want to do something, remember, component 3, focusing or targeting academic ways of thinking through decontextualized tasks. Okay, let's analyze it and let's see the patterns. And then we can do your bar graph at some point that you mentioned, but we can also just start looking at columns and then look at the columns and do little check marks. You can even be really creative if they're younger. You can have them all the people stand up, all the kids stand up, and you see how many over here, how many stand for this. I mean, there are lots of things you can do, but you're collecting data. And the idea with MALP is you're going to use this data, and you are going to do, it's oral, it's written, you're combining the two. They're going to write some kind of sentence about it. You're going to use sentence frames. You're going to you can have them compare, contrast, you can have them do percentages, whatever it is, but you're using this data that you've collected, and it can be very simple. And we talk about some things that maybe are just end up with as a little pie chart, or as I even mentioned, having them stand up. But we also talk about how it forms the basis of something much more involved. And we talk about this in the book, namely, Carol did she's a high school teacher, and she has a SLIFE social studies class. And in high school in the US, everybody has to learn American history. And I'm sure in many countries, they have to learn the history of their countries. And, you come in and, your SLIFE, you may not have much idea of the historical time in the first place. And then you're confronted with something completely alien. How are you going to build a bridge between something that has no relevance to you and but you have to learn it for the curriculum? Does a survey, what do you do in your free time? Gets all that information. I'm going to do it very quickly. Finds out what Civil War soldiers do finds a website, has the students go to the website, collect the information, does a Venn diagram, and all kinds of things come out. And one of the most moving stories for me is one of the students who was totally disengaged in the class suddenly discovered that the Civil War soldiers liked to whittle. And yes, whittle. We don't whittle very much in the United States. And all of a sudden, the light bulb went out, and he said, I whittle. I learned to whittle from my uncle, and brought in pieces he had whittled to the class. And he became engaged.
What is whittling?
It is carving with I don't know if it's a special knife, but they carve, like you have a piece of wood, you can do something simple like a whistle, but really creative people, they can make little animals, they can make figurines. It's always out of wood. And I would love to send you some pictures of it, but you can go, it's a good thing that you asked, because we don't do this very much anymore, but it's W-H-I-T-T-L-E is the verb, to whittle.
Right. It's like carving, let's say, a little duck with a piece of wood using a piece of metal, like
using a knife. Yeah, it's usually a special.
Yes.
I believe sometimes they use just a pocket knife, I've seen, but I've also seen some kind of a curved knife.
Yes, got it.
So all this, but it was that connection, that immediate relevance, that he suddenly had something to contribute, and it started out with a survey. All started with a survey.
And the survey is helpful to know what students are familiar with. Then we can bring that's a ramp for them to add to for teachers to help them create a ramp to the content.
And also think about this. You can do a survey. It doesn't matter how old you are, how young you are. It doesn't matter what your language proficiency is or what your prior educational experience. You can do this with any group. It's extremely versatile.
Right. And it's ROC based, meaning like students are speaking instead of reading and writing.
And then you could connect it. You can do that. You make the connections there.
Yes, perfect. Well, let's move to talking about adolescent SLIFE, who I have a heart for because I work with adolescents.
One in our book, remember I mentioned, and Helene also mentioned, we have it divided up because these are real teachers. We have it divided up by sections, elementary, middle, and so on, adolescent. And one of the projects by one of the teachers was done with her class, and it was done for Hispanic Heritage Month, which is a month at the beginning of our school year, which is in September for most parts of the country. And it's to honor people of descent from Latin America and their contributions to the American culture. And her students happen to be all from Latin America. So before I go into this project, though, I want to ask you and the listeners to do something. So I want you to think for a moment of your favorite food. All right? Think of your favorite food. As you think of your favorite food, think about what it smells like, what it tastes like, what it looks like, and then think about what memories and emotions it evokes. I think we can all have lots of things here, and we could go on and on about it. So Danielle, in this project, she starts out, or a part of the project is the students watch a video of a young woman cooking together with her grandmother and talking about this recipe that's passed down the generations. So think of the food is so important, so much for so much of our lives. It's way beyond sustenance. And she begins with them, and the students watch this, they discuss it, and then they start talking about other customs and rituals and practices. So they are all from Latin America, but Latin America is not a country. It is many, many countries, many, many different cultures. They have many things they share, but the food is not the same. So even of course, the accents aren't the same, even necessarily the languages aren't all the same. And even when they do, for example, have the same food, and I'm going to name one, which happens to be one of my favorites, it's called empanadas, which are, I don't know if you're familiar with the stuffed dough, but if you go to, for example, to the Dominican Republic, these are fried. You go to Argentina, they're baked. So when you think of it, in fact, if somebody was thinking of it, you could have very different memories and about preparation. So they could talk about, they could share. They celebrate some of the same holidays. They don't celebrate some of the holidays and what's going on. So they are now engaged in reflecting on a deeper level. What is my identity as a person of country X? I'm from Latin America. We share this bigger culture, Hispanic, but what are the differences? What are the similarities? And then they prepare their own slide deck of who they are, their culture, their customs, and so on. So it infuses all the elements of MALP. And you can clearly see how you're developing this sense of interconnectedness, because of course, Danielle brings in her experiences also. And the oral is there, the written is there, and targeting decontextualized tasks, because they're preparing all these things, and with academic ways of thinking. They're also learning computer skills. She talks about that, and you can see all the steps in here. They're learning the basics of the school year, and they're learning how to use the computer, log on to the computer, and how to do research and not plagiarize or steal.
I can see why it's a wonderful project, because it's so affirming to who they are. It's starting with something they understand, with the food that they love, that they can smell it, they can taste it, they can see it, and a memory associated with it. Which connects to their culture, which connects to holidays and celebrations, and then they can bring it all together. Your students, the teachers of students who use the MALP principles must share really great reflections with you. Can you share a few reflections with us?
Yes, okay. I would like to talk about Gloria, and we don't call her Gloria in the book. We use pseudonyms. We also have an article about this same teacher, a separate article about her and her class. She was a secondary math teacher, and I worked with a math department in the Bronx for actually 2 full years, because it took a long time. I didn't go there every day, but it was very slow process, and getting them to make the transition to MALP and having them talk about it with each other and all of this. And Gloria was one of the people that really became a master at MALP. And when we found her, when we first, you observe the teacher as a baseline,
Mhm.
she her students were not doing well. She had a class of ninth graders, and many of them had very little background in math, and she had to teach them algebra. It's ninth grade. And she had to think about the curriculum and all that. So I worked with her on MALP and gave her a lot of guidance and suggestions about what she could do. And basically, she revamped her instruction according to the framework, the MALP framework. And she managed to completely change the way she presented math, which was always would be have a do now. They had a particular lesson they had to do, but of course the head of the department was giving permission. Again, you have to get this kind of permission. You're supposed to do a do now, and everyone does the same one and all of this, and it's very individual, and check the answer. Then she would give a little lecture. It's done a certain way, and then they would practice individually at their seats. And it was a traditional math class, if that makes sense. But instead now, she had, for example, a calendar up on the wall with everybody's birthday. And when it was someone's birthday, and it was a math class, but why not have the calendar? Because they got to know each other better. And then when they would do problems, she would partner them in various ways each time. She would partner them and it would go up on the wall. And so if you walk in the room, it would go up on the wall. And somebody mentioned bar graphs earlier. Yeah, she had a bar graph on the wall. And what they had done was they did a bar graph of each other's ages. Like, how old are you? And remember, they're all different ages. They're not all 14 in ninth grade. They're SLIFE. So there were a lot of them that were 18 years old. And so that was part of this bar graph. So she actually reflects in the book, and I would like, if you don't mind, to read a quote. So this is Gloria. "This is my new favorite class. We really have a good time, and they actually get it. It makes such a difference to teach this way. For SLIFE, who were failing, I can see real progress. They still take longer than other L's to catch on, but they're trying and succeeding over time. I now have a 60% pass rate in that class, up from only 20%. So, you have to talk about the scores, right? So in any case, that's Gloria.
Well, when I'm listening to the conversation that we're having here today, MALP is really the answer to a lot of schools. They've been asking is, how do we bridge the student and school connection, or family and school connection, right? And so we might not be able to bring family members to the school to do the content, but students bring content with them. And so what we have to do is we have to get to know our students.
Yeah.
Then from there, we can find the ways to build the ramp up to content. And that's why students are not failing those who use design lessons projects with MALP. It's relevant for them. And it's an easy on-ramp to academic.
I also just want to bring up, the tendency is to a top-down approach. And even when you talk about many times, for example, about immediate relevance, it's from the perspective of how does it relate to the curriculum. It's my perspective of immediate relevance. But MALP takes the bottoms up. Start with a student. These students are not blank slates. They have incredible life experiences. Let's get to know them. How can we leverage them and get that runway so that they can take off?
Yeah. You're saying let's teach through an assets-based lens. Let's find
Yes.
their assets and let's teach with those assets, not
Yes.
with, oh, I have to fill the bucket. I have to fill as buckets, right? Yeah. So let's end with this. You have a Facebook dedicated to your book. You have websites and featured trainings, workshops. Would you share those before we leave?
Okay, well, I'm not a big Facebook user, and Andrea created these pages, but but we try to post on them, and we have a page for our new book. We also have a Facebook page for this book, which we did a podcast with you on this book. So if anyone's interested in hearing that podcast, it talks about this book, which came out in 2020. And we also have a page for this. We haven't talked about this book. This one has not been revised yet, but if anyone wants to be in it, and you want to try MALP and you want to do a project, when we do another edition of this book, maybe we'll put you in.
For those who are listening to the podcast, can you read those the titles again?
Okay, this is Meeting the Needs of SLIFE, a Guide for Educators, second edition, 2020. This is Making the Transition to Classroom Success, Culturally Responsive Teaching for Struggling Language Learners.
Right.
And this one was originally published in 2013. But it does have it has a lot in it about theme booklets, and the newcomer booklet is an example. And theme booklets, we haven't really talked much about that, but we have a whole MALP design around theme booklets, and it can be done with language or content from the curriculum or procedures like the newcomer booklet. So theme booklets. And then this is our baby that we're talking about today, which is the 2023 book that came out, guess when? March. No, that was the other one that came out in March 2020. This one came out in March of.
Breaking New Ground for SLIFE came out last spring in 2023, the second edition.
Yes.
Actually has the mutually adaptive learning paradigm in its subtitle.
Yes.
So we put that in to indicate that it's really a MALP book.
Oh.
And then we do have a website, MALPeducation.com.
Right.
So MALPeducation, all connected, .com.
Right.
And there are a lot of resources there.
Right.
And
go
ahead.
The main thing I want to share with teachers is like, you get these books not because it's a curriculum or a program. You get them because it's a way of shaping instruction for us newcomers. That's the biggest thing.
Yes. And we do training. We do training for adult education. In August, I'm going to be doing a webinar for adult educators. And we also do work with school districts. And we're very excited because this year and next year, we're working with Chicago Public Schools, which is very exciting.
They're a big public school system.
I know, yes.
And we should also mention that we now have a cadre, a team of MALP trainers who we trained last year. We had already started training them. We had a very intensive training, and then they've completed all the work, and now they are on our team and working with us in doing training in different sites.
So they're spreading the gospel and the goodness.
Yes.
Well, thank you for sharing the goodness again with your book. I always enjoy having you on the podcast. Your energy and your passion shows you are, though you are retired, the passion runs bright and fiery. So thank you so much for lighting our path with your fires, in particular, while we work with students who are newcomers and students who are SLIFE. Dr. DeCapua, Dr. Marshall, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.